Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. First we're going to talk about the conflict on the territory of Ukraine, where it seems that both the Russians and the Ukrainians are tasked to exhaust each other. And the question is who would be exhausted first, either the Russians or the Ukrainians. And first let's talk about the Russian attack that took place during the previous night. We have lots of very interesting details about this situation. The Minister of Defense of Ukraine this morning stated that the Russians used just 155 drones to attack the territory of Ukraine, and this is the lowest number probably since the beginning of the previous week. And according to information we have, the Russians once again were mainly attacking trucks, gas stations, warehouses, and parking sites. For example, we received videos from the Chernigov region, and in this video we can see several trucks that were destroyed by Russians, and I would like to remind you that the Ukrainians used trucks and this system to attack deep inside of the territory of Russia with drones. So the Ukrainians used trucks as drone carriers. So this is another episode also from the Chernigov region, and here we can see another parking site with dozens of trucks that were destroyed by Russians. So as we can see, trucks is the primary and the biggest priority for Russians. Another important target, of course, is gas stations. In this video, we can see a warehouse that was destroyed in the northern parts of the Chernigov region. Most likely the Russians decided or thought that the Ukrainians were using these barracks to store drones that later the Ukrainians were planning to use to attack deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation. Another important area is the settlement of Konotop, and here we can see, and this is the most important situation, here we can see another barrack that was destroyed as a result of attack, and here we can see several trucks, but these are not just regular trucks that the Ukrainians used to attack deep inside of the territory of Russia as drone carriers. These are fire trucks. So this is another important detail, and this is another important situation, and currently fire trucks is becoming the most important target for Russians, because if you have fire trucks, then you have tools to stabilize the situation, let's say to extinguish the fire. But if you don't have fire trucks, this means that you will not be able to extinguish the fire, which means that this or that object of logistic would be destroyed completely. And telling the truth, during the previous night we received several updates on this matter. The Russians began hunting and destroying fire trucks across the entire eastern parts of Ukraine. Another important area is the city of Kharkiv. According to information we have, the Russians completely destroyed this warehouse, and during the night we received lots of videos on this matter. In this video we can see the night, probably around 1 or 2 a.m. of the 8th of June of 2026, and here we can see how the Russians were bombing the city of Kharkiv using drones, probably drones, but maybe even missiles. But as you can see, according to the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, the missiles were not recorded. And as a result of this attack, as you can see, this warehouse was significantly damaged by the Russians, and the first thing that we can see is that fire trucks and fire crews came to this area with the purpose to stabilize the situation and to extinguish the fire, which means that most likely not the entire building was completely destroyed, because probably the Ukrainians managed to stabilize the situation. Anyway, despite the fire trucks and fire crews that were in this area, a huge fire anomaly was recorded through this territory, and later, more precisely this morning, we received this video where we can see the consequences of attack. As you can see, according to the Russian attack, at least some part of this warehouse was completely destroyed, but the rest of the warehouse the fire crews teams managed to save, which means that fire trucks and fire crews currently is becoming one of the most important target for Russians, because if there are no fire crews and fire trucks, this means that there would be nobody on the territory of Ukraine who will be able to stabilize the situation and to extinguish the fire. So once again, fire trucks are becoming the first and the primary target for Russians, according to the previous night between the 7th and the 8th of June of 2026. Now let's move further. The settlement of Pavlograd, here we can see that something was destroyed as of the morning of the 8th of June of 2026. We don't know for sure what exactly was destroyed, but when talking about these titles and all these letters and all these shields, here we have a park site. So the Russians attacked a parking site somewhere in the territory of Pavlograd, probably with several tracks of vehicles or service centers there. So once again, parking sites, warehouses, trucks and fire trucks are the primary target for Russians. The city of Dnipro, once again, a parking site was destroyed with a significant number of vehicles, dozens of vehicles. But as of this attack, we see not just trucks, but we also see just regular light vehicles that the Ukrainians use for their purposes. Now we're moving further. Now let's talk about the Kherson, Zaporozhye, Nikolaev direction. The settlement of Pastolovo, another parking site, was destroyed, as you can see, and as a result of attack, not just parking site, but a core wash service was damaged and destroyed, where we can see several trucks were parked. The settlement of Bashtanka. As for this territory, the Russians attacked an object of infrastructure in the southern parts of the settlement, so these buildings were damaged, and probably not just damaged, but destroyed. Here we can see the consequences of attack. Black smoke broke out right after the Russians attacked the territory, which means that something chemical was located on the territory of this enterprise and the Russians destroyed it. And we received reports that the Russians were also attacking the Odessa region. But as for the Odessa region, we have lots of very interesting details on this matter, so let's discuss them in detail. So let's start. According to information we have, during this morning, the Russians, for some reason, decided to attack the settlement of Zatoka, so this territory. The Russians, for these purposes, used several Su-30, Su-34, Su-35 aircrafts. They were moving from the area of Crimea in the direction of the settlement of Zatoka, and somewhere from these positions, the Russians launched missiles in this direction and bombs probably as well, and later explosions were recorded. So the Russians were attacking, according to information we have, this territory. As of the moment when I started making this video, very difficult to say whether the Russians managed to destroy something or not, but we have this picture. So in this video, in this picture, we can see the approximate flights of Su-34s and Su-35s. As you can see, they were moving from Crimea in the direction of Odessa, and here we have the approximate routes of Ha-59-69 cruise missile movements. So what the Russians were attacking is a very interesting situation, but if you ask my opinion, I believe that this morning the Russians were trying to attack the ZATOKA bridge, so this territory. Why the Russians did that, the question is very interesting, but the problem is that the Russians probably were mirroring, and the Russians were carrying out a retaliatory strike. I would like to remind you that during the previous 48 hours, the Russians attacked a bridge along the M18 road, this one. And for example, today pro-Ukrainian sources published this video, and in this video we can see how Ukrainians were using their drones to attack the bridge. The Ukrainians were attacking probably not to destroy the bridge, but just to understand the drones' capabilities against constructions like this. The Ukrainians were trying to understand whether using drones like this they are able to damage the bridge or at least to stop traffic through this area, and probably they managed to do this because this morning we received a report that the Russians were forced to change the logistics through Crimea and through Kherson. So as you can see, according to this picture, the Russians ask civilians and business and military forces not to use the bridge, but to move further in the west and then to answer the territory of Crimea through the settlement of Armyansk. So this is the new logistics that the Russians are forced to use due to the situation in the area of this bridge. And this is a very important situation. And if the Ukrainians indeed manage to damage or to destroy this bridge, we believe that the Russians using Su-34s and Su-35s were attacking the ZATOKA bridge as retaliatory measures and as a mirroring attack to the situation that the Ukrainians created several days ago. Now let's talk about the Ukrainian attack. During the previous nights, we received lots of very interesting updates on this matter as well. According to information we have, this night the Ukrainians launched 250 drones, and as you can see, according to this picture, the Ukrainians didn't use the northern directions to attack deep inside of the territory of Russia. Very difficult to say why the Ukrainians stopped using the Chernihiv and Sumy region, but probably due to the situation that the Russians established 100% control over this territory with drones, reconnaissance drones, and so on. Just at the beginning of this video, we were talking a lot about explosions in this area, and probably currently the Ukrainians don't have possibilities to use these territories to attack deep inside of the territory of Russia. So that is why the Ukrainians currently can use just the southern regions to attack in the southern direction, and this is exactly what the Ukrainians did yesterday and during the previous night. And we have reports. First of all, the Ukrainians, according to information we have, also attacked and damaged several fire trucks. So this is another important situation, because the Ukrainians also understand if the Russians don't have fire trucks and fire crews, this means that the Russians will not be able to extinguish the fire and to stabilize the situation fast, which means that the damage the Ukrainians deal can lead to bigger and huge consequences in comparison if there are fire crews and so on. So that is why the Ukrainians also hunt and attack these type of vehicles and these type of forces. Furthermore, during the night, lots of explosions were recorded through the city of Mariupol. The sources reported that the Ukrainians attacked a substation which is located in the western parts of the city. So according to information we have, this object of energy infrastructure was damaged by the Ukrainians during the previous night. Furthermore, the Ukrainians attacked the settlement of Alchevsk, and this is not the first time when the Ukrainians attacked the settlement of Alchevsk. Since the beginning of this year, probably 10 or 20 times the settlement was attacked. Gas stations were destroyed, several chemical plants were damaged, but as of the nights between the 7th and the 8th of June of 2026, the Ukrainians also attacked another object of energy infrastructure. Now let's move deeper and let's talk about the territory in the southern parts of Russia. According to information we have, this night the Ukrainians were attacking the city of Novorossiysk, more precisely this object of energy infrastructure. And during the night and this morning we received lots of updates on this matter, and in this video we can see black smoke that rose right after the Russians attacked the territory. Most likely several oil tanks were damaged by the Ukrainians. We have lots of videos on this matter. We have so the Russians haven't managed to protect this object of energy infrastructure, and the Ukrainians once again attacked this territory and deal significant damage. Furthermore, the Russians still haven't managed to stabilize the situation in the area of the settlement of Lubinsk, which is located a bit further in the northeastern direction. I would like to remind you that several days ago the Ukrainians attacked oil tanks and oil base in this area, and as a result of attack we see black smoke rose right after this situation happened. So the Ukrainians continue attacking objects of energy infrastructure in this area because the Russians, despite some limits and restrictions in the area of the Crimean bridge, still use this territory with the purpose to bring fuel on the territory of Crimea. So that is why the Ukrainians attack these objects on the territory of Russia with the purpose not to allow the Russians to concentrate and to concentrate fuel, with the purpose then to move it further in the western direction. So the situation, as we can see, is quite critical both for Russians and for the Ukrainians, and obviously, as we discussed for many times since the beginning of this year, we see signs of a total war between Russians and the Ukrainians, and the military campaign of 2026 differs significantly from any single military campaign that we have seen since the beginning of the special military operation. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation on the ground. During the previous night we received lots of interesting updates. According to information we have, the Russians continue offensive operation for the settlements of Bachevsk and Ulanova, but without changes on the ground, as we can see. And during the night the Russians were also attacking the city of Glukhov, and this is another place where the Russians attacked and destroyed several fire trucks in this area. So this is we missed this update during the first parts of the video, but let's once again return to the situation. So as you can see, during the night the Russians destroyed several fire crews and several fire trucks through the northern parts of Ukraine, which makes completely impossible for the armed forces of Ukraine to stabilize the situation and to extinguish the fire very fast, which means that from this very moment, probably if anything attacked in this area, it will burn or destroy completely without any let's say actions from the Ukrainian side. As for the Sumy direction, during the previous day, more sources reported and confirmed that the clashes are taking place for Pisarevka, Volzhanska, and Kianitsa and Novorossiysk. The Russians are trying to break through Ukraine's defenses in this area, but we see that Ukrainians show fierce resistance and they hold their lines. Furthermore, the Russians improved their positions along the river of Rybitsa, and the Russians continue advancing along the eastern bank of the river with the purpose to establish complete control over the settlements that are located to the east of this river. So we're talking about this pocket, and these are the changes on the ground between the dates. This is the end of the 6th of June of 2026, this is the 7th, and this is the 8th of June. The Russians continue advancing and they will try to take everything under complete control along the river of Rybitsa and Psyol. Now let's talk about the Kharkiv direction. As we discussed just a minute ago, the Russians destroyed a warehouse in the northern parts of the settlement, and we have already discussed this video with the consequences of attack. And I would like to remind you that these days we receive lots of updates about Russian attempts to attack the settlement of Kozachye Lopань. The Russians are moving through the villages of Shevchenko, Granov, and Veterinarne, and as you can see, this warehouse in the northern parts of the city of Kharkiv lays on the same line with the Russian offensive operation, which means that most likely the Ukrainians were using this warehouse for supply and logistic purposes. They were supporting the contingent of the Kozachye Lopань, and when the Russians most likely discovered this, the Russians attacked this warehouse, which means that currently the Ukrainians and the contingent of the Kozachye Lopань will start suffering huge problems with support. Now let's talk about the Volchansk direction, Bely-Kolodets direction. The map has been adjusted. This is the situation by the end of the 7th. This is the situation by the end of the 8th of June. The group of forces north once again reported that currently there are very heavy clashes for the settlement of Agrimovka, and the Russians continue advancing. It seems that in coming days the settlement of Agrimovka would be captured by Russians completely. Furthermore, the Russians reported that now there are very heavy clashes for the settlement of Petroivanovka. As of the 8th of June, as of the 7th of June, the Russians are completely concentrated for the forest of Krasnaya. There are very heavy clashes on the territory of the forest, and the Russians are about to finish the battle for this territory, and then the Russians will continue advancing further in the direction of the settlement of Petroivanovka with the purpose to maintain the line to the west of the river of Oskol. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Konstantinovka direction. We have changes on the ground, very interesting one. I would like to remind you that these days the Russians managed to improve their position significantly through the city of Konstantinovka. Almost every single day we were adjusting the map in the Russian favor, and the 8th of June is not an exception of this rule. This morning the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that the Russians, as a result of clashes, established complete control over the settlement of Molocharka, which means that the Russians managed to improve their positions through the eastern flank significantly. So this settlement is under Russian control, which means that in coming days, most likely the Russians will intensify their attacks in the direction of the settlement of Popasne from the south and from the east, with the purpose to encircle the contingent of the armed forces of Ukraine between the cities of Chasiv Yar and Konstantinovka, and this situation may force the Ukrainians to fall back. So the front line is collapsing in this area, and we see that Ukrainians currently cannot able to stabilize the situation. As for the Zaporozhye direction, during the previous night we received small changes through the settlement of Mala Tokmachka, and these days we have lots of changes on the ground in this area. So for example, let's take a look at the map. This is the situation by the end of the 5th of June of 2026, and it seems that this is the moment when the Russians began their major offensive operation. First, according to different sources, the Russians captured the former prison, and several days after, the Russians improved their positions through the central part, and the Russians continue advancing. So which means that currently we see the final battle of the city of Mala Tokmachka, and most likely the battle for the Orekhov agglomeration and the city of Orekhov has begun. The Russians will continue offensive operation, and at the same time the Russians will continue offensive operation also from the northeast, and the group of forces east have already reported that first Russian groups have entered the settlement of Novostolovka, and that there are very heavy clashes already through the settlement itself. So as we can see, the Zaporozhzhia offensive operation is gaining momentum. The situation is critical, but we see that, as we discussed during the first seconds of the video, it seems that both the Russians and the Ukrainians are tasked to exhaust each other. The question is who is going to be exhausted first. And it seems that the Ukrainians are planning to intensify the situation with the purpose to be the first to exhaust the Russians earlier. And because yesterday we received the report that Zelensky came to London, where he had a meeting with Prime Minister of London, of England, of United Kingdom, Keir Starmer, with Chancellor of Germany, Merz, and with the President of France, Macron. And according to information we have, they discussed lots of questions, lots of issues. And after the end of this meeting, the sources reported that Zelensky received an approval to use long-range cruise missiles. And the Zelensky and Ukrainian sources reported that the Ukrainians are about to finish the construction and the build of ballistic missiles, and Ukrainians are about to start using them. And if Ukrainians begin using the ballistic systems, then this is going to be a completely different conflict. Anyway, Germany, France, Britain, and Ukraine have agreed to 5 conditions for achieving a just and lasting peace. First, a cessation of hostilities. Second, using the current front line as starting point for peace negotiations. Third, after the ceasefire, Ukraine must receive legally binding security guarantees, including the deployment of multinational forces on its territory. Fourth, Russian assets are to be frozen until the war ends, and the compensations is paid to Ukraine, and the protection of European security interests within the framework of any future agreements. So, which means that these statements make the negotiations between Russians, the European countries, and Ukraine impossible. Which means that the conflict will continue. Which means that in coming days and coming weeks, the Ukrainians will begin using ballistic missiles to attack deep inside of the territory of Russia, and then this is going to be a completely different conflict. But at the same time, as you may know, something began happening once again on the territory of the Middle East, which means that oil prices will once again back to the level of $100 per barrel, which means that the Russians will have enough of money to support and to finance the conflict on the territory of Ukraine for more months and maybe even years. And that's it for today, for the short video. The Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye-bye.